does the American household begin to feel inflationary effects? So we're at $75 a barrel roughly right now. At what price point does the American household begin to feel some inflationary effects?
I don't want to throw out a number. I think we're frankly, it's too early to say that something like that's going to happen, and I know you know that, but I wouldn't want to throw out a specific number. If prices went up materially, people would feel that.
Okay. Again, I think if I look at the data here, WTI per barrel about 120. It peaked at about $120 in 2022. What do your models suggest would occur to inflation, and how would it influence the Fed's thinking should we be back at $120 a barrel?
Well, let's just say there's a big price spike in that range. So, we would look at that and we would ask ourselves, look at the overall situation. We would ask ourselves, should we react to that? So, for example, during what we called the Arab Spring back in the early teens, oil prices went up a lot, and that went into the price, and then there was a discussion, and I think the right answer was to look through that. The question you'd be asking to yourself, because by the time you react, the price comes back down. I think the question today would be, is the situation different, and what would be the implications of those differences?
Gentleman's time has expired. I thank the gentleman from Connecticut. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina. Mr. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, I want to touch on international standard setting bodies like the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Their goal is to promote better harmonization for global capital flows and regulatory standards, but the Biden administration's implementation of Basel III endgame demonstrated the pitfalls when the U.S. is a follower.
I hate it when they start talking about Basel III. If we start going down this road, I'm going to vomit.
Barr's proposal, which made capital less acceptable and put U.S. firms and businesses at a global disadvantage. Do you agree that the United States should only implement international standards in a way that is consistent with our own domestic legal and regulatory scheme?
I do.
I appreciate the Federal Reserve's announcement yesterday to end the use of reputational risk during banking examinations. This supervisory practice was used as a tool to pressure banks to refrain from offering financial services to politically disfavored individuals or industries. What further steps is the Federal Reserve taking to help usher in these changes, such as ending examination practices that informally encourage banks to close certain accounts without written justification?
So we're developing, I should say Vice Chair Bowman is developing a range of policies that will help in that area, and I should let her speak to it. But as you know, we've eliminated reputation risk largely in a thoughtful way from those things. I think we became more aware of that problem over the course of last year, and like the other agencies, decided to move away from that. We're very conscious of the fact that we shouldn't be telling banks who they can lend to, that's a decision for them in the private sector.
Let me ask you this, how are you ensuring, though, that like the frontline examiners are aligned with this new direction and not continuing with any past practices?
I will say that is the ultimate question is will and I think they will, and I think as a former bank examiner, Vice Chair Bowman is actually very well positioned to engage with supervisors and in a way that someone with experience can do successfully, whereas if you don't have that experience, I think it might be harder.
Thank you. Secretary Bessent recently announced a drive to change the culture of supervision through improvements to examination procedures, enhanced monitoring of examiners' compliance with those procedures, and more realistic processes for appealing supervisory findings. That includes defining unsafe and unsound by rule using more objective measures rooted in financial risk. Do you support this initiative?
I'm a vomit if we keep doing this. I will start talking about Israel in just a moment if they start talking more about this.
On issues of supervision, Vice Chair Bowman.
I'll give this guy his talk, but if the next person's not asking about rate cuts, I'm going to start talking about Israel.
I would ask her what she thinks about that.
Just sort of a changing direction on a couple of questions. During the volatility in the Treasury markets last April, some have speculated that foreign investors were dumping Treasury securities. Since then, though, recent data has showed that foreign investors' holding of U.S. Treasuries held close to a record high in April. Does this data show that Treasury's safe haven status and the dollar's global reserve currency status remained strong while the administration conducted trade negotiations?
I would say yes to that. I think we need to be careful about these narratives that pop up quickly. I mean, we're the world's reserve currency and the world's greatest democracy, and I think the dollar and is always going to be, for a long time, is going to be the reserve currency and the place where people want to be.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe there's a possibility that Treasury markets will crack, just as Jamie Dimon has recently warned at the Reagan National Economic Forum?
Oh, here we go.
No, I don't want to say things like that. I don't think that's something that's happening. Treasury markets are functioning well and normally, and they did function through a period of pretty substantial stress. And as you pointed out, Mr. Moore, that they're focusing well now.
Thank you. With that, I yield back. And actually, if Ms. Salazar is still here, I'll give her my remaining time. If not, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Williams of Georgia. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being here. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to ask questions sitting at the bottom of the room, but I am happy to have this conversation today because the last time we talked last July, I mentioned that combating economic inequality is a critical part of the Fed's dual mandate, and that is something that I am deeply interested in.
Is combating inequality part of the Fed's mandate? Because I don't actually think it is part of stable prices and maximum employment. I think that's a happy coincidence as the economy expands. Oh, they cut away! Oh, CNBC cuts away as soon as they start talking about inequality. Oh!
From where we are today, almost a year later. Forget our economy firing on all cylinders. Now our economy and our nation seem to just be on fire. We're looking at tariffs that are raising the prices of groceries, fuel, housing, and everyday goods.
Dude, what a time to cut away for CNBC. Oh my gosh, no.
Done. And my nail tech told me about the increase in cost of so many of the different products that would be used just for me to get my manicure monthly, because tariffs are frightening so many of our small businesses, which we know are the backbone of our economy. And so it's hurting my community in Atlanta. But it doesn't seem like our president and my Republican colleagues are really interested in making sure that our economy fires on all cylinders, as long as billionaires continue to get richer, because that's what we've seen and all of the gutting that has been done to the federal government. And Chairman Powell, I'm sure that this is coming to your department as well. With the recent events that we've seen, we know that it is very dangerous to gut the federal government, agencies that we depend on, and politicizing the work of agencies such as yours. Chairman Powell, this current president has tried to reclassify tens of thousands of non-political public servants just to make it easier to fire them. And that includes people who have served in Democratic and...
Oh, there we go, some commercials.
Who our current and previous president routinely has threatened to fire. I think I just heard something on CNN today while you were here testifying. But what effect has this policy had on the career civil servants in your agency? And are these threats making it easier or harder for the Fed to do monetary policy?
They're having no effect. We're doing our jobs.
You're doing your jobs. I appreciate you doing your job, even when it might not be easy. It is important to tune out the things that you hear on the media, because I hear it every day representing a district.
CNBC goes to listen to Carnival Cruise Lines
Talked about on the call just
while she's asking questions. Yikes.
Thousands of federal employees.
Just bad timing.
But my district has one of the widest racial wealth gaps in the country. Much of that has to do with our worsening housing crisis. And unfortunately, as we've seen with the past 6 months, this administration has been focused on this big billionaire bailout bill, gutting HUD, and releasing a budget that does not...
Big billionaire bailout! Ah, I haven't heard that one before. Big beautiful bill, BBB, big billionaire bailout.
In your opinion, Chairman Powell, what would you expect the effects would be on the housing market if the president were to lower interest rates without addressing the housing supply crisis nationwide?
Sorry, if you were to what?
if the president, the president has talked about having the power to control interest rates. In your opinion, what would you expect the effects would be on the housing market if the president were to lower interest rates without addressing the housing
The president
supply crisis?
can't lower interest rates. She doesn't know that.
Honestly, it's not our job to speculate on things the president might do.
So what impact do interest rates have on on housing access?
Over the long run, they don't really affect housing supply. You know, assuming that rates will go up and down.
Well, not on the supply, but on the housing market. The supply is separate that we need to address going into this.
You have to build that with local building permits. Okay, she is a little clueless, in fairness.
The end all be all to getting people into housing. We must address the housing supply crisis. But what impact do interest rates have on the housing market in general?
Well, interest rates really affect housing demand. So with lower rates, you see more demand, and higher rates, maybe less demand.
Thank you, Chairman Powell. I am out of time, but I have lots of questions that continue to work to close the racial wealth gap in this country, specifically focused on my district in Atlanta, where it is so prevalent. Thank you so much.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Stutzman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Powell, great to see you. And again, as I mentioned to you before, always appreciate your steady hand at the wheel and not, I guess, getting out of your lane necessarily, but obviously you have a huge impact on the economy and what's happening there at the Fed. I want to kind of follow up a little bit on housing, as I've been hearing a lot about housing concerns in Northeast Indiana, and I know you're not you're used to being beat up on a lot by folks all around the country, but I want to speak specifically to one particular individual, Cardone Capital, Grant Cardone. He made some pretty strong remarks about
Cardone! They're gonna call Cardone!
Your policy when it comes to the housing industry. And he said, that's why you have 500,000 more homes listed than buyers for those homes. When the rates come down, prices will also come down with it because you'll have more supply in the marketplace, and supply is what controls prices. He went on to say that, interest rates do not control prices, and he explained that lower rates could stimulate activity in the market, and activity is what makes the economy work. And I agree with his comments, overall, but I believe, as you said earlier, the economy seems stable. And I would agree with that coming from an ag and manufacturing area. It's not booming yet, but I believe most people are optimistic that the good times are coming and that the structure is set and in place. But to housing, it seems like that's where a lot of Americans they're stuck. They've had low rates, they've got a good mortgage rate, but if they want to make a move, they have to go out of that 3% interest rate into 4.5%, 5% or higher percent interest rate. Thoughts on addressing housing, because their prices are up for sure. Yeah. But people there's no activity. There's the velocity is very slow. Would you like to comment on any of that?
Sure. So we see the same thing you do in the housing market. It's tough. There's not people are locked in. They can't afford to get out of their house because the cost of getting to a higher mortgage, higher price mortgage would be a lot. So the best thing we can do, though, is to get inflation sustainably down to 2% and have it stay there over a long period of time, And that is really what we can offer to them. And I think, so
if there's no recession in the next 3 or 4 months, house hack's going to get into probably a type of like home equity line of credit style lending, wedge style. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be huge because there's so much locked up equity out there.
And their customers feel, we understand that, but we only have one tool for the whole economy, not just for housing. So it's something we consider, but we have to consider the bigger picture. And I do think in the medium term, as rates come down, you'll see normalization in housing. Of course, there'll still be a national housing shortage. I don't know about your district, but
yeah. No, there's a shortage.
Yeah.
I mean, considering the macroeconomics of interest rates, I mean, how much consideration do you take housing into that decision as you address interest rates?
You know, we're always briefed on it, we always talk about it, we always look at it, but at the end of the day, it's the big U.S. economy, the whole aggregate thing that matters. We also talk about the agricultural economy a lot as well, but ultimately, and manufacturing, it's got to be the whole, and not any one particular piece.
Yeah, I just would mention it is hard for American families to make that move, and they're stuck. And so I would just highly consider, ask you to consider that piece of it, because when Americans can't move and Americans can't upgrade or move laterally even, it really keeps the economy kind of holds the economy back a bit when Americans don't have that. But again, I want to say thank you, because you have a tough job, but I haven't heard from anyone in my district asking interest rates to go up. So I'll just pass that along from Indiana's 3rd district. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes gentleman from Colorado. Ms. Peterson is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great to see you, Chair Powell. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to thank you for your long service to our country. I know that you've served under many Democrats, Republicans. You've always been nonpartisan and done your job to put our country first. And we appreciate your steadfast leadership. And
They're not showing the baby on C-SPAN.
It will be.
She has a baby.
Here. I have some.
I wonder if C-SPAN's not allowed to show the baby. Oh no, here it is.
Touched on this a little bit through the questions today, but around the.
If you have house hack questions, email us. It's ir@househack.com.
No matter what president you served under, Republican or Democrat, was to make sure that this was not a political position, while you brought news that some would not be happy about because it reflected what you had to do to address inflation. When I think about the conversations we've had going through the global pandemic and the economic fallout, and how we had to infuse money throughout our country to keep our services afloat, our businesses afloat. And while we suffered from inflation like the rest of the world, we had the quickest, strongest recovery. We were leading the globe, and so much of that was because.
Is she gonna ask a question? I think she's from Congress, and she's from Colorado. She's been there since 2023, so maybe a little newer.
Independence. What are your biggest concerns about a potential successor that doesn't prioritize that and wants to do what is politically asked of them versus what they need to do for the country? And what are their long-term repercussions
speculate.
if you're not acting on addressing the economic uncertainties and trying to address inflation in this position?
So I wouldn't speculate on that, but I would say, the credibility on of the Fed on price stability is very, very important. People believe that we will bring inflation back down to 2% over time.
That's
and
my Powell.
If they really do believe it and it's true, then that'll have big effects on not just short-term rates but long-term rates. If that were to be called into question, then you'd see long-term rates go up. I mean, that credibility once lost is very expensive to regain, is what the historical record says. So I just think I think people should understand that credibility on inflation is hard won, and something we need to constantly tend. And that's what we're doing with our current policy, is just being careful with potential inflation risks. We haven't overreacted. In fact, we haven't reacted at all. But we're being a little bit careful about that set of questions as we decide what to do next.
And thank you for bringing that up. As we look at where we were, how far we had come in our economy, things were starting to stabilize, and we were starting to finally see a relief on the interest rates. They were starting to go down. Now they're holding steady. Can you talk about why the instability? When we look at tariffs around the increase in the deficit by the proposed big ugly bill that is being brought through Congress right now, and
big ugly bill, bro. She's not gonna answer. Oh, he's not gonna answer. This is ridiculous.
So with this economic uncertainty, where we were going, we were on the way down, or reducing our rates, and now we have to hold steady to address the instability. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
I'm sorry, could you just briefly restate your question there? I apologize.
Yes, I'm going to do this the best I can with with Sam here. That with our having to address inflation, as we've started to see it, you were able to decrease the rates. We were starting to go down a little bit. We were seeing that our economy was finally.
She's basically trying to get him to say, yes, we are waiting on reducing rates because we're waiting for the impact of tariffs, so it's Trump's fault. That's what she's trying to get out of him.
Everyone was projecting before this administration,
which is true,
changes, that it was going to continue to go down. Can you talk about why you have had to choose to hold steady on the interest rates?
So we just, we stick to what we're assigned to do, which is maximum employment and price stability. We don't have opinions on fiscal policy or trade policy or immigration policy or any one of another, or regulation policy, other than we have our regulatory responsibilities. And so we take what comes as it comes. And, elected politicians do what they do, and we don't criticize that. We don't have opinions about
Gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleladies.
Thank you, and thank you, Sam.
Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. De La Cruz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much.
I think she had a lot of trouble getting her questions out, honestly, because of the baby. I hate to say it, but babies are very distracting.
Monica De La Cruz, and I am from deep South Texas, a largely Hispanic district, a rural community right there on the border of Texas.
We follow the rules.
I serve as the vice chair for Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, and it's difficult for families right now to afford a home on an average paycheck. I'm committed to finding affordable housing solutions for the people in my community, but also for all over the nation. So, Chair Powell, mortgage rates remain significantly elevated relative to Treasury yields, with spreads well above historical norms. To what extent does the Federal Reserve believe its balance sheet policy, particularly the runoff of MBS holdings, is contributing to this widening?
She doesn't even know what MBSs are, mortgage-backed securities.
To your broader assessment of financial conditions.
I don't think that our runoff of MBS is a particularly large contributor to that situation. I also think it's not just interest rates. It's so many things around housing now. It's insurance, it's materials, it's land acquisition, it's labor. There's so many cost pressures that are pushing up housing costs.
Thank you. With that being said, moving on to an entirely different topic, if the Federal Reserve focuses on issues outside its dual mandate, there are more opportunities for policy mistakes. How can you ensure that no other climate policy work is being done at the Federal Reserve?
So it is a big risk to our independence if we were to stray into areas where we shouldn't, that really aren't part of our mandate. And I would agree that climate is the biggest risk. So we really did the bare minimum. We did much less than I think people understand in the climate area. All we did was one piece of guidance, and then we ran one stress scenario, and by the way, didn't find anything. And I think you don't look to us to try to take on a bigger role or really to play any role in climate, which I personally think is an important issue and one that needs to be dealt with by elected officials. And for bank regulators just to step in and take that on without a mandate from Congress is not a good idea. It's not a good solution, and it's not a good way to remain independent.
Reclaiming my time, what kind of climate guidance did you make?
Oh, come on.
For just the big banks, I believe, we asked them to monitor to have a framework for which they would monitor their risks from lending. That's all it was. And I would say that that guidance is something we're looking at pulling back.
When you say the risk for lending based on political climate change, is that correct?
Well, the idea was that, the changing climate could, I mean, I'm not defending this, I'm telling you what the idea was. The idea was, you know, climate change would cause certain kinds of assets to lose value, and that if banks are lending to in those areas or to those industries, then they should at least be able to measure. It didn't ban anybody from doing anything. It wasn't prescriptive. At the same time, you know, you have the feeling that the side effect of it would be to
quick note here. Hood back at its line. Carnival paired back after the CNBC interview. Tesla can't get to 347. Qs are just climbing. They're doing just fine today. Bitcoin's holding over 105 now. AMD is actually doing nice, holding on to that 5%. It's pretty impressive.
Facts.
HIMS has a little bit of a dead cat bounce going on, but not too much today. And Circle is still under the line. Look at that. Perfectly under the line. The Meet Kevin line.
Stayed outside of political agendas. When it comes to climate change, that is a political agenda, and I would have to disagree with you on that. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who's also a ranking member of the Capital Markets Subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
We don't notice good bank regulation. Things just go smoothly. But in 2023, we saw the effects of inadequate bank regulation, where we lost 3 banks. There was a proposal that passed the House